I was just a biker on a peaceful ride, until a child's cry shattered the silence and dragged me into a fight against an enraged father and a rival gang. The asphalt shimmered under the July sun, the heat rising in wavy lines that distorted the road ahead. My Harley, a beast I called Beulah, rumbled beneath me, a deep, guttural roar that was more a part of my own heartbeat than just a machine. This was my church, the open road. Just me, the wind, and the vibration that shook the stress right out of my bones. I was taking the long way home, cutting through a quiet, leafy suburb I didn't usually frequent. Old houses with big porches, kids' toys scattered on perfectly manicured lawns. It was a world away from the gritty, oil-stained reality of my garage and the clubhouse. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a sound that belonged here, not amidst the chirping birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. It was a thin, hitching sob, the kind of raw, hopeless sound a child makes when they think no one is listening. I eased off the throttle, Beulah's roar softening to a low growl. I scanned the sidewalk and saw him. A little boy, couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, sitting on the curb next to a bicycle that was lying on its side like a fallen soldier. His small shoulders were shaking, his face buried in his hands. I know what I look like. I'm a big guy, 6'4", built like a brick wall, with a beard that hasn't seen a razor in a decade, and more ink on my arms than a public library. To a kid, especially a crying one, I probably look like the monster from under the bed decided to go for a joyride, so I didn't just pull up next to him. I glided past slowly, parked Beulah about 20 feet down the road, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost as loud as the roar had been. I swung my leg over the seat and took my time. I pulled off my heavy leather gloves, tucking them into my belt. Then came the helmet, which I placed carefully on the seat. Finally, I took off my sunglasses, blinking in the bright sunlight. I wanted him to see my face, to see I was just a man, not some leather-clad boogeyman. I walked toward him slowly, my boots heavy on the pavement. "Hey there, little man," I said, my voice softer than usual. "Everything all right?" He flinched, snapping his head up. His eyes were wide and red-rimmed, his cheeks stained with tears, and a little bit of dirt. He was a handsome kid, with bright, intelligent eyes that were currently clouded with pure misery. He scooted back on the curb, away from me, pulling his knees to his chest. He didn't say a word, just watched me with the cautious terror of a cornered animal. "Easy now," I said, holding up my hands, palms out. "I'm not going to hurt you. Just saw you were having a rough time. Is it the bike?" He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. His gaze flickered from my face to his fallen bicycle and back again. I took that as an invitation and walked over to the bike, crouching down to get a better look. It was a nice bike, a slick-looking BMX that was probably the kid's pride and joy. And I saw the problem immediately. The chain wasn't just off, it was snapped. A link had given way, and the greasy metal snake was now mangled and useless, half of it dangling near the pedals, the other half wrapped around the rear sprocket. A clean break. No fixing that without a new link and a chain tool. "Ah," I grunted, pointing. "Snapped your chain clean in two. That's some serious pedaling you were doing." I looked back at him and offered a small smile. "You training for the Tour de France?" A tiny flicker of a smile ghosted across his lips before disappearing. He wiped his nose on the sleeve of his t-shirt. "It's brand new," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I just got it." My heart gave a little twist. I remembered that feeling. The soul-crushing despair of a new toy breaking. "That's the worst," I said, nodding seriously. "Happened to my first bike, too. Felt like the end of the world." I looked at the chain again, then back at my Harley. Tucked into my saddlebags was a full toolkit. It was meant for a 2-ton beast of a machine, but it had everything I might need. "Tell you what," I said, standing up. "I've got some tools back on my bike. I might not be able to fix it perfectly, but I bet I can rig it up enough to get you home. How's that sound?" His eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting in them. "Really?" "Sure thing. Can't have a good bike like this out of commission." As I walked back to Beulah to grab my tools, I felt good. It was a simple fix, a small act of kindness in a world that didn't have enough of them. I grabbed my tool roll and a rag, and was heading back to the boy, when the squeal of tires cut through the quiet afternoon air. A sleek, black Mercedes sedan pulled up to the curb with aggressive speed, stopping just inches from the boy's broken bike. The tinted window slid down, and a man in a crisp polo shirt and expensive sunglasses leaned out. He didn't look at me. His gaze was locked on the boy, and it was cold as ice. "Leo," the man snapped, his voice sharp and devoid of any warmth. "There you are. I told you what would happen if you damaged it. What did you do?" The boy, Leo, visibly shrank. The little bit of hope that had been in his eyes vanished, replaced by sheer panic. He scrambled to his feet, staring at the man in the car with wide, terrified eyes. "It wasn't my fault, Dad. It just broke, I swear." The car door flew open, and the man got out. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and there was a vein pulsing in his temple. He strode over and loomed over his son, ignoring me completely as if I were a piece of lawn furniture. He poked a sharp finger into Leo's chest. "Don't you lie to me. Nothing just breaks. You were being reckless again, weren't you? This bike cost more than the piece of junk your mother drives. You have any idea how much trouble you're in?" I stood there, tool roll in my hand, a silent observer to this brutal dressing down. This wasn't just a disappointed father. This was something else. This was cruel. My hand tightened around the heavy steel wrench inside the roll. The father then grabbed the bike by the handlebars, yanking it up off the ground. He gave it a violent shake, the broken chain rattling against the frame. "Look at it. Useless, just like you." That was it. That was the line. The air crackled. The quiet suburban street suddenly feeling like a pressure cooker. I took a slow step forward, planting my feet firmly on the pavement. The man finally seemed to notice me. He turned his head, his expensive sunglasses hiding his eyes but not the sneer on his lips. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescending superiority, as if he was addressing a cockroach. I let the tool roll drop to the ground with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the tense silence. I looked from his angry, twisted face to the terrified little boy standing behind him. And just like that, I knew this wasn't about a broken bike anymore, not by a long shot. I took a deep breath, the smell of hot asphalt and cut grass filling my lungs, trying to keep the lid on the rage that was boiling up inside me. I'd seen bullies my whole life, on the playground, in the bars, even in my own family once upon a time. They all wore different clothes, but they had the same look in their eyes, the look this guy had right now. "I asked if I could help you," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. He puffed out his chest, trying to make himself look bigger. On anyone else it might have worked. On me, it was like a chihuahua barking at a grizzly. "No," I said, my voice coming out as a low rumble, "but you can help him." I nodded towards Leo, who was frozen in place, his eyes darting between us. "You can stop screaming at him for something that wasn't his fault. Hey." The man actually laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You're telling me how to raise my own son, a greasy ape in a Halloween costume. You have no idea what you've just stepped in, buddy." He took a step closer, trying to use proximity as intimidation. The scent of his expensive cologne was cloying and obnoxious. "This boy needs discipline, something you probably wouldn't understand." "I understand that a snap chain is a parts failure, not a character flaw," I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. "And I understand that calling a little boy useless makes you the useless one, not him." His face went from sneering to a mask of pure fury. The vein in his temple throbbed violently. "That's it. I'm calling the police. You're harassing me and my son." He fumbled for his phone, a sleek silver brick that probably cost more than my first bike. "Go ahead," I said, not moving a muscle. "Call them. I'll wait. I'll be more than happy to give them a statement. I'll tell them how I found your boy, crying his eyes out. And I'll tell them how you showed up and threatened him. Let's see who they're more interested in talking to." His thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment the whole world seemed to hold its breath. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, and I could see the frantic calculations happening behind his sunglasses. He knew I was right. A 6'4" biker covered in tattoos calmly explaining a situation is a lot more credible than a screaming, enraged man in a polo shirt. His public image, his perfect suburban facade, was at risk. He lowered the phone, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grinding. "You're a real tough guy, aren't you?" he hissed, "hiding behind a little kid." "He's the one who needs someone to hide behind right now," I shot back, "and it sure as hell isn't you." That did it. He lost the last shred of his composure. With a snarl, he lunged past me and grabbed Leo by the arm, his fingers digging into the boy's thin bicep. "We are leaving. Now!" Leo cried out, a sharp yelp of pain and fear. And in that instant, all my calculated calm evaporated. I moved. It wasn't a punch or a shove. I simply closed the distance in a single step and clamped my hand around his wrist. My grip is something I'm known for. I've crushed beer cans with it, tightened bolts that wrenches couldn't budge. To this man, it must have felt like a vice made of steel and bone. He stopped dead, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He tried to yank his arm away, but it was useless. We stood there, locked together, a tableau of simmering violence on a quiet, sun-drenched street. He was breathing heavily, his carefully constructed superiority completely shattered. "Let go of the boy," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final warning. He stared at my hand on his wrist, then at my face. He saw something there that finally got through to him. He saw that I was not bluffing, that I was not going to back down, and that he had pushed me as far as I was willing to be pushed. Slowly, carefully, he uncurled his fingers from Leo's arm. I released his wrist. He stumbled back, rubbing the angry red marks my grip had left behind. He looked from me to his son, who had scrambled behind my legs, his small hands clutching the back of my leather vest. The man's face was a twisted wreck of humiliation and rage. I braced myself, expecting him to come at me, to try and throw a punch he had no chance of landing. But he didn't. He did something much worse. A horrifyingly calm, cold smile spread across his lips. "Fine," he said, the word dripping with venom. "You want to be his hero. You think you know what's best for him." He walked over to the broken bike, picked it up, and practically threw it at my feet. It clattered on the pavement. "Then he's your problem now." He turned, strode back to his Mercedes without a backward glance, and got in. The engine roared to life. I stood there, stunned, with the little boy still hiding behind me, his body trembling. The black car tore away from the curb, leaving a patch of burnt rubber on the pristine asphalt. And then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he was gone, leaving me standing on a silent street with a terrified, abandoned child. The silence that descended after the Mercedes disappeared was deafening. The squeal of tires echoed in my ears, a final screeching punctuation mark to the ugliest family drama I'd ever witnessed. For a few long seconds I just stood there, the sun beating down on my neck, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was just supposed to fix a bike chain. Now, I was standing in the middle of a stranger's street with a kid who had just been thrown away like a piece of trash. I felt a small tug on the back of my vest. I looked down. Leo was peering around my leg, his eyes wide and tracking the empty road where his father's car had been. His face was a pale, blotchy mess of confusion and fear. He wasn't crying anymore. It was worse than that. He looked hollowed out, like the sobs had been scooped right out of him, leaving nothing but shock behind. He's gone," Leo whispered, his voice barely a breath of air. "Yeah, buddy," I said softly, my own voice sounding rougher than I intended. "Looks like he is." I crouched down, trying to get on his level, trying to look less like a giant. "You okay?" It was a stupid question. Of course he wasn't okay. His own father had just disowned him on a sidewalk in front of a total stranger. But it was all I could think of to say. Leo just stared at me, his lip trembling. He shook his head, a tiny, jerky motion. "Okay," I said, nodding slowly. "Okay, first things first. Let's get this bike off the road." I picked up the BMX, the frame feeling feather light in my hands. I wheeled it over to the curb and leaned it against a tree. Then I went back and picked up my tool roll. My hands were shaking slightly, a mix of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated anger at that man. "What's your name?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle. "I know your dad called you Leo. Is that right?" He nodded again, still not trusting his voice. I'm Marcus, but my friends call me Bear. I offered him a small, hopeful smile. It's nice to meet you, Leo, though I wish it was under better circumstances. He didn't smile back, but some of the tension seemed to leave his shoulders. He looked at my tattoos, his gaze lingering on a sprawling design of an eagle on my forearm. Do you know where you live? I asked. Is it around here? I can help you get home. That was the wrong thing to say. The fear flooded back into his eyes. No, I can't go home. He'll be there. His voice cracked. He'll be so mad. Of course. The Mercedes was probably parked in the driveway of one of these perfect suburban houses. The thought made my stomach turn. This kid was terrified to go to his own home. Okay, I said quickly. Okay, we won't go home. How about your mom? Is she somewhere else? We could call her. A flicker of hope. She's at work, he said. She's a nurse, at the hospital. Which hospital? St. Jude's, he said immediately. St. Jude's. That was downtown, a good 20-minute ride from here. All right, that's a plan, I said, relief washing over me. A plan was good. I could handle a plan. We'll call your mom. I pulled out my own phone, an old beat-up smartphone with a cracked screen. Do you know her number? Leo's face fell. It's in my dad's phone. He has all the numbers. Of course he does. A controlling monster like that would keep his kid on a tight leash. I ran a hand over my beard, thinking. We couldn't go to his house. We couldn't call his mom directly. We were stuck. I looked at Leo, saw the desperation in his eyes, and knew I couldn't just leave him here. I couldn't call the cops either, not yet. That would just be a different kind of trauma for him, getting handed over to another set of strangers. Okay, new plan, I said decisively. It's a bit of a ride, but we're going to go to the hospital. We'll find your mom there. How does that sound? His eyes widened. On your motorcycle? On Beulah, I said, patting the seat of my Harley. She's the best ride in town, but I only have one helmet. It's a bit big, but we'll make it work. Safety regulations be damned. There was no way I was leaving this kid. Leo looked from me to the massive bike and back again. The fear in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, a glimmer of awe, and maybe a little bit of excitement. For a kid who loved bikes, a Harley-Davidson must have been the ultimate machine. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I echoed. But before we go anywhere, I'm starving. And I bet you are too. There's a diner just a few miles from here. Best burgers in the state. What do you say we grab a bite first, give your mom some time to finish her shift? It was a lie. I had no idea when her shift ended, but I needed a neutral space, a place to let the kid breathe and figure out our next move. He managed a small nod. I like burgers. Then it's a date, I said, trying to inject some cheerfulness into the situation. I carefully settled my helmet on his head. It was comically large, wobbling a bit, but I tightened the strap as best I could. It would have to do. I secured his broken bike to my sissy bar with a couple of bungee cords from my saddlebag. It looked ridiculous, but it worked. I helped him climb up onto the passenger seat behind me. Now you hang on tight to me, I instructed, guiding his small hands to grip my leather vest. Don't let go for any reason, you got it? Got it, he squeaked, his voice muffled by the helmet. I fired up the engine. Beulah roared to life, a thunderous explosion in the quiet street. Leo jumped, his little arms squeezing me like a vice. I gave his hands a reassuring pat, then eased the Harley off the curb and onto the open road. As we rode, I felt the tension slowly drain out of him. The rumble of the engine, the wind whipping past us, the sheer thrill of it all, seemed to work a kind of magic. By the time we pulled into the parking lot of Sully's Diner, he was leaning into the turns with me, no longer holding on for dear life, but for the joy of the ride. The diner was a classic, all chrome and red vinyl. We slid into a booth, and I ordered us 2 massive cheeseburgers, fries, and a giant chocolate milkshake with 2 straws. The food arrived, and Leo, who I was worried might be too upset to eat, devoured his burger like he hadn't seen food in a week. Watching him, a little bit of color returning to his cheeks, I felt a fierce protective instinct swell in my chest. He was halfway through his milkshake when he finally spoke, without being prompted. My dad, he gets mad a lot, especially about money. He wouldn't look at me, just stared into the swirling chocolate vortex in his glass. He said the bike was an investment in my future. He wants me to be a pro BMX rider. Is that what you want? I asked gently. Leo shrugged. I just like riding my bike. It feels like flying. The bell over the diner door jingled, and I glanced up reflexively. 4 men walked in. I knew them instantly, and they were from a rival club, the Vipers. Their leader, a guy named Snake with a nasty scar that cut through his left eyebrow, locked eyes with me from across the room. His gaze flickered down to Leo, then back to me. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. This wasn't a social call. They had followed me, and I had just led them straight to a scared, vulnerable little boy. My blood ran cold. Of all the diners in all the world, they had to walk into this one. The Vipers and my club, the Disciples, had a rivalry that was less friendly competition, and more like a simmering pot of bad blood always threatening to boil over. Snake was the worst of them. He lived for confrontation, for sniffing out weakness and exploiting it. And right now, sitting in a booth with a small child, I looked like the weakest I'd ever been. My hand instinctively went to the heavy buckled belt at my waist. I pushed my half-eaten burger away, my appetite gone. "Leo," I said, my voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the alarm bells screaming in my head. "Listen to me. I need you to stay right here. Don't move from this booth, you understand?" Leo looked up, his milkshake forgotten. He saw the Vipers swaggering towards us, saw the look on my face, and his eyes widened with a fresh wave of fear. He nodded, his small body rigid with tension. "Hey, Bear," Snake sneered, stopping at our table. His 3 goons fanned out behind him, blocking any easy exit. The air grew thick, the smell of their cheap cologne and stale cigarette smoke overpowering the scent of greasy fries. "Didn't take you for a babysitter. Whose kid did you snatch?" "He's with me," I said, my voice flat and hard as granite. I slowly slid out of the booth, putting myself between them and Leo. "You've got no business here, Snake. Turn around and walk out." Snake chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I don't think so. We were just coming in for a bite. But now I'm curious. You look a little out of your element, big man." His eyes darted past me to Leo, who had shrunk into the corner of the booth, trying to make himself invisible. "What's the matter, kid? This big, ugly biker scaring you?" That was it. The casual cruelty, the deliberate attempt to terrorize a child who had already been through hell today. The rage I'd been holding back since I met Leo's father came roaring to the surface. "The only scary thing here is your face," I growled. "Now I'm telling you for the last time. Leave. Us. Alone." Snake's smile vanished. "Or what? You gonna take on all 4 of us? Here, with your little sidekick watching." He took a step forward, closing the space, his hand balling into a fist. "I don't think you have the guts." He was right, in a way. I couldn't start a full-blown brawl in the middle of a diner with Leo watching. It would traumatize him even more. I was cornered. But as Snake postured, his eyes full of arrogant certainty, I saw something over his shoulder. A reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser on the next table. A woman had just walked in. A woman in blue scrubs, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a look of frantic worry on her face. Her eyes scanned the diner, and then they locked onto our booth. They locked onto Leo. "Leo!" she cried out, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Snake and his crew turned, surprised by the interruption. The woman Leo's mom, it had to be, rushed forward. She didn't even seem to notice the 4 menacing bikers. She only had eyes for her son. She slid into the booth and wrapped Leo in a fierce hug, burying her face in his hair. "Oh, my baby, I was so worried. Your father called me. He said you ran off." She pulled back and looked at me, her eyes filled with a million questions. Who are you?" Before I could answer, Snake, ever the opportunist, chimed in. "Ma'am, we were just expressing our concern. This man," he said, gesturing at me with a thumb, "doesn't seem like the best company for a young boy." Leo's mom looked from Snake's leering face to me, then back to Leo. "Leo, what happened? What's going on?" And then, the little boy who had been so quiet and scared found his voice. "He saved me, Mom," Leo said, his voice clear and strong. He pointed a small, trembling finger at me. "My bike broke, and Dad started yelling. He left me, and Bear found me. He was going to take me to you. He bought me a burger. I guess he then turned his gaze, now full of defiance, on Snake. They're the bad guys. They were trying to scare us. The entire diner had gone silent. Sully, the owner, was standing behind the counter, his hand hovering over the phone. Every customer was watching. The narrative Snake had tried to spin, of me as some kind of kidnapper, was shattered by the simple, honest words of a child. Leo's mom looked at Snake and his crew, and her worried expression hardened into one of pure, unadulterated mama bear fury. She was a nurse. She'd seen it all. She wasn't intimidated. "I think you and your friends should go," she said, her voice dangerously calm. Snake looked around. He saw the owner reaching for the phone. He saw the other patrons glaring at him. He saw me, standing there, no longer cornered, but ready. He had lost, and he knew it. With a final venomous glare, he jerked his head at his crew. "Let's go. This place stinks anyway." They turned and slunk out of the diner, the bell on the door mocking their retreat. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I slid back into the booth, my legs suddenly feeling weak. Leo's mom, whose name I learned was Sarah, looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I can ever do to thank you." "You don't have to," I said, shaking my head. "I just did what anyone should have." We talked for a while. She told me this wasn't the first time her husband had exploded over something small, that his anger was getting worse. Leaving Leo was a new, terrifying low. She assured me, with a steel in her voice I hadn't heard before, that it would be the last time. She was taking Leo and staying with her sister. She was done. An hour later, I was back at my garage, the familiar smell of oil and steel a welcome comfort. I had Leo's bike clamped in my vise. I found a new master link in my spare parts bin, and, with a few expert clicks of my chain tool, the broken chain was whole again. I greased it, checked the tire pressure, and polished the frame until it gleamed under the shop lights. Just as I was finishing up, a car pulled into the lot. It wasn't a sleek Mercedes. It was a sensible, slightly dented station wagon. Sarah and Leo got out. I rolled the bike out to them. Leo's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. He ran over and threw his arms around my legs in a tight hug. "Thank you, Bear," he mumbled into my jeans. I rested a heavy hand on his head, a lump forming in my throat. "Any time, little man. You remember what I told you. Keep flying." He grinned, hopped on his bike, and did a perfect wheelie across the parking lot. Sarah watched him, a real, genuine smile on her face for the first time. She turned back to me and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "It's not much," she said. "But please, let me pay for the parts." I opened my hand. It was $100 bill. I tried to give it back, but she was insistent. "Keep it," she said firmly. "For the burger, and for everything else. You're a good man, Marcus Bear." As they drove away, Leo waving frantically out the back window, I looked down at the money in my hand, and then at the open road stretching out beyond my garage. It hadn't been about the bike or the money or being a hero. It was about seeing a kid in trouble and not looking the other way. My life was loud and rough, but that day, on a quiet suburban street, I'd been given the chance to make it mean something. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the asphalt, I knew it was a ride I would never forget.